Thank you. We'll get started. That was a practice session. So I'd like to call the session of the Public Service Commission to order. Secretary Burgess, are there any changes to the agenda?
Good morning. There are no changes to the agenda this morning.
Okay, so we're going to be changing things up a bit today. We have actually a very full agenda, and we're going to be beginning this actually with the regular agenda as opposed to the consent agenda. And to begin with, today we're going to be addressing a number of issues related to storm preparedness for the utilities. As everyone is aware, in the wake of Hurricane Sandy and Irene and the other storms, the issues have around the energy sector, and telecom sector, gas sector, water sector, around storm resilience has become a very critical issue. We're almost just a year post-Sandy. The Moreland Commission took a look at preparedness, and clearly we're going to be looking at in the future a world where the ability of having weather-related incidences and the need to make sure our critical infrastructure is there for us and there for New Yorkers is immense. I woke this morning and look at the paper and you look at the devastation that happened in the Philippines, and it's a sad reminder of how weather can affect people. And so for us, we feel it's incredibly important and our responsibility, and certainly I believe that the regulated entities agree that the public needs to have confidence that if these incidences happen, that we are all prepared. So what we're going to be doing today is identifying the steps that we're going to be taken across the various sectors we regulate. And as I think about the industry, we've always recognized from the standpoint of the electric utility industry, the ability to recover from both summer storms and winter storms is critical. But we're also finding that's equally important for all of us in looking at gas, telecom, water's essential as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with Raj. Raj is going to be putting everything into context for us, and then we're going to go through several of the sectors. We are going to be taking things a little bit out of order just to make sure everyone's awake. And so we're going to be beginning with item 202. Then we're going to go to 301, then 201, then 101, and 501. So let me start then with Mr. Adipale. And Raj, can you just give us all basically a basic context of how we're approaching this?
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. As you said, today we'll be dealing with many items focused on utility planning and restoration for major events that affect utility service on a widespread scale. We'll address some of the activities that this Commission undertook recently and what we have to do next in order to continue to improve reliability and service to customers. As you said, we'll cover not only electric but also natural gas and telecom industries in the presentations today. We'll also note the current practices with the water industry. It's fair to say that each industry is at a different stage of evolution in this process. As we all know, the Commission has a long history of overseeing the implementation of electric utility emergency plans and in reviewing the performance of electric companies relative to major outages. The requirements for electric utilities are spelled out in Part 105 of our regulations. Why have we focused on the electric industry so much over the years? And for several reasons. Many are perhaps obvious to most of us, but let me state them anyway. First, virtually all consumers in the state have electric service, and that service is vulnerable to virtually all storm conditions. Electric utility performance affects how many customers are affected and how quickly customers get service back on. Second, as we know, electric service is a foundational service on which so many other aspects of community survival are dependent. Just look at pumping at gas stations. That's an example of how other critical services depend on electricity. We have seen how they're affected on a major scale in the most recent storm in some parts of the state. Third, we have vast experience with the vulnerability of the electric systems to wide-scale disruptions as we experienced over the past decade from hurricanes, ice storms, and snowstorms, which cause extensive damage to above-ground utility systems. We all know that in recent years, the frequency and the intensity of storms have increased, and the nature of storm impacts have changed to include significant flooding damage, which has adversely impacted underground equipment. Recent examples include flooding from Lee upstate and Superstorm Sandy downstate. These flooding events have exposed additional vulnerability with underground electric, gas, and telecommunication systems. These shifts in damage and impacts to customers have caused us to reassess and increase our focus on two aspects. First, as you said, what can we do to make the system more resilient to begin with, to withstand these major events and to reduce the frequency and duration of outages? And second, how can utilities improve their current emergency planning and restoration procedures and protocols? On the latter, let me quickly recount the activities the Commission took in the recent past in a three-prong approach. In the first prong, in the spring of 2013, we escalated our review of electric emergency plans to make them much more rigorous. This is partly in response to new legislative requirements. If you recall, recent legislative changes to the Public Service Law required the Commission to approve the emergency plans to be filed by utilities starting in December 2013 and give the Commission new powers to levy administrative penalties. The electric utilities filed their annual updates to their emergency plans on April 1. They were approved by the Commission with some modifications at the August 2013 session. These approved and strengthened emergency plans are a foundation for exercising this new administrative power. On a second prong, in April 2013, the Commission also introduced a performance scorecard, which is designed to provide a more objective gauge of utility performance and execution of the electric emergency plans. The scorecard is designed to paint a picture of utility performance in emergency preparation, restoration operation, and communications. The scorecard is an extension of and complements the Commission's long-standing focus on electric system reliability and performance measurement. While the existing reliability metrics ensure minimum performance during normal operating conditions, the scorecard and the emergency plans strengthen regulatory oversight with new measurements, and with that focus, expectations and ultimately accountability for performance when utilities are required to respond in the face of abnormal conditions. On a third prong, the Commission has also taken action as a result of recent outages to address the consumer protections that should be applicable to customers affected by prolonged outages, as well as whether or not customers should be billed for the period in which they were out of service. At the Commission's request, staff has been working on a statewide policy on these matters. Staff received comments on its draft proposal and will discuss our recommendations in one of the items coming up. Now, moving on to the status in other industries. Regarding the gas industry, while the Commission's regulatory regime has long required gas utilities to prepare and file gas emergency plans, we are now escalating our review of them by subjecting them to a more rigorous scrutiny because recent severe weather events, in particular flooding damage, has highlighted the need for stronger emergency planning. We have an item discussing the next steps. And regarding telecom industry, where companies operate in a complex federal-state jurisdictional scheme, with some entities clearly subject to the Commission oversight and others operating under federal jurisdiction. And in contrast with electric and gas companies, the telecom providers operate in a competitive environment. In this arena, we have successfully used a largely cooperative approach both with the carriers and the FCC, where the carriers and the department have long-standing agreements to provide information to enable the Commission to assist the state in its overall efforts to manage major events. It has also become clear that we need to forge a stronger relationship between and among the telecom carriers and the electric utilities to improve cooperation and outcomes for end users. Finally, regarding the water industry, the New York State Department of Health, as an extension of the state and federal potable water supply health contaminant requirements, is the primary state regulatory body for oversight of content and thoroughness of emergency plans for all public and private New York State potable water suppliers. The department staff does have access to the major private water utilities emergency plans. During major events, DPS staff monitors and assists as necessary the utilities coordination efforts to restore full service. A bit earlier, I said there are two major efforts underway to help improve reliability and service to customers. Besides the increased focus on improving emergency planning and restoration procedures to improve reliability and service, utilities are also increasing their focus on system resiliency. How can we incorporate resiliency features in the ongoing capital budgets that could improve reliability? While utilities have been doing this exercise for several years, it has taken on increased urgency in light of recent storm experiences. A case in point is the Con Edison proposal in its rate case in front of the Commission to spend about $1 billion over the next 4 years to harden the system. In conclusion, in today's presentations, we are moving the ball forward on many fronts. We'll start with the electric utility items first, and then on to the consumer protections, and then on to gas and telecom items. That concludes my brief introduction, Chair.
Thank you. And before we move on to the individual items, does anyone, any of the other commissioners, do you have a comment you want to add? Okay, we'll move on, but I think safe to say that this is always going to be a work in progress, in the sense is that this is an area where we will learn and continue to learn, and obviously would invite the best practices to be shared not only intra-industry but inter-industry. So with that, Mike Warden, would you want to, let's start with item 202.
Good morning, Chair Brown. Chair Brown, how was that?
It's okay, we look alike. Good start,
I actually
Michael.
had a thought of doing that wrong this morning. So
Did you really? Was that a nightmare you had?
Could have been.
You're living it.
It was a nightmare.
Okay, so let's start over again.
Or it was your nightmare. Now it's his.
Item 202 is on equipment sharing. In his State of the State address this year, Governor Cuomo identified the need for sharing of long-term capital assets and critical equipment for the mutual use of New York utilities. This recommendation was also part of the 2100 Commission's report. In February of 2013, you instituted a proceeding to identify inventories and to start a collaborative process with the electric and gas utilities to review the possibilities for sharing of equipment. NYPA, LIPA, and NYSO were also invited to participate in the collaborative, and they did participate. The joint utilities consulted with staff throughout this process, and we actually started this with a technical conference amongst all the utilities and a large group of staff members on March 13th, 2013. One of the first tasks that we had was discuss what equipment should be included in this inventory, because the utilities have a lot of equipment that's really not pertinent to what's going on during these storm responses. So we kind of narrowed the field. And, you know, many of the utilities we found already had certain types of equipment identified that they would use for storm response things. So we took that lessons learned that they had, and then we applied it to all the utilities, and we tried to make a uniform method of reporting this information so that Utility X could look at what Utility Y has and make sense of it. The utilities filed those inventories with us on April 15, 2013, and then they started more into this collaborative process. There were several mutual aid practices reviewed as part of this development effort. The first is EEI's Spare Transformer Equipment Program. It's called the STEP program. This is something that's used and has been around the industry for quite a while, and it's used for bulk power transformers. You know, so that's something that actually Con Edison and National Grid participate in that program. So they brought their learnings from that into this. National Grid has done a lot of work of sharing inventories between National Grid, the former Niagara Mohawk, and its New England operations. So they've shared the lessons they learned there on how to share equipment, and they've actually moved towards standardization of a lot of equipment. And then there's a variety of mutual assistance groups out there. You know, the one we've talked about all the time is the New York Mutual Assistance Group. That's actually now part of a larger North American mutual assistance group. But they're taking the lessons and the protocols that these groups have used in the past, and then they're strengthening them. There's really been a tremendous amount of change in these mutual assistance procedures since Sandy took place a year ago. There's also actually what's called a national response event, which is a national mutual assistance thing that's going on as well. And I'm going to come back to that a little later. The collaborative utilities filed a report with the Commission on June 3rd, as was required in your order. And we've reviewed those recommendations, and we recommend that the utilities, based on this report, that they use their existing storerooms to maintain adequate supplies to be shared during these major events, maintain an inventory that includes all the companies so they can see what's out there as they need to do it. And then essentially they need to develop the protocols and procedures for doing this sharing within them. And I can say a lot of work has been done on that. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, we were reaching out to the utilities to talk about one minor thing we were trying to clarify, and it was clear that they were having meetings on a regular basis with this. So we really think they're really up and ready to go. The sale of this equipment needs to follow certain uniform practices, needs to follow uniform accounting practices. Some of the key elements is that while this is starting with New York and is focused on the New York utilities, we recognize that there's a need to look beyond New York. Now, we're already taking into account, you have National Grid. They got a larger footprint, okay? So that larger footprint is kind of reflected in what's going on here. Same with the Iberdrola companies. But coming back to the NRE thing, that's a program that's going to be run nationwide for these major Sandy type events. It's not going to be applied on the smaller events, but it's not only on these huge things. And there's efforts underway in that to develop a material sharing program. So that's going to be part of this national thing. I think it's going to take more time to develop than what we're seeing in New York, but it's coming down the road. One of the things we're asking you to do in the order before you is to give the utilities Section 70 approval for this equipment that's going to be transferred under this program. We think that's necessary just to make the whole process efficient and not make it too cumbersome. In parallel with this effort, the individual utilities have updated their in-house material inventories and their pre-arranged vendor material arrangements. All the utilities have vendor arrangements, and sometimes they have a stockpile at the utility themselves, but other times they have stockpiles that are maintained at vendors. So that vendor sharing is going to be brought into this umbrella thing as well. So they've been doing things to strengthen that. Some specific activities they've done. Con Edison's vendors now maintain a six-month supply of certain inventory items that are used during emergency response. In the past, it was a 3-month supply. National Grid and Central Hudson have increased their emergency inventories by 20% and 10% respectively. NYSEG and RG&E have increased their electric emergency material inventories at vendor locations by 11%. And finally, O&R increased the quantity of each item stocked approximately 5 times from what was stocked pre-Sandy. The next steps we have is to finalize the storeroom locations that they're going to use for this sharing stuff. Some of the companies, like NYSEG has like 13 different divisions within its territory. And many of them are localized, like the Brewster division is a small thing. It doesn't have room to store tons of equipment. But each of the companies has kind of a centralized location. And so we'll focus on those locations as how they do this. But, ultimately it's up to the utilities to figure out how to manage that. The draft order before you would ask them, the utilities, or direct the utilities, to finalize the unified protocols, procedures, and third-party vendor involvement within 30 days. The procedures and protocols at a minimum must include uniform accounting policies for the sharing of critical equipment and supplies, a documented plan for communicating inventory levels and material changes that occur throughout the year, and an amended list of critical equipment and supply storeroom locations. the utilities should consider their proximity to potential neighboring utility locations. A detailed breakdown of the equipment vendor involvement, including a list of vendors who will be invited to participate during emergency events. And finally, provisions for periodic meetings of the parties to continually discuss and develop best practices. And I can tell you, all those, that sounds like a lot we're asking them to do in 30 days. They're already doing this. This is a matter of dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and presenting it to us. But a lot of this work is already underway. If there was an event today, I'm convinced they would do sharing or have that ability, unlike they were able to do a year ago. So one final area I want to touch on is the standardization. The draft order doesn't recommend or doesn't direct the utilities to standardize those sharing practices, but it does urge them to work towards standardizing common materials that are shared over time. I've had some involvement with National Grid when they merged with the New England operation, and some knowledge of the work that is taken to standardize it. It's difficult, but if we can kind of look for low-hanging fruit of things that can be done, I think it's something worth pursuing as we go forward. So that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. Let me open it up for questions from my fellow commissioners. I'll just start with the left. Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I think it was useful getting the various utilities together talking. I think the success of this has already begun just by convening them. And, obviously I think you've made some really good findings that one central area does not make sense because if that central area is vulnerable, then we've got a big problem. So a lot of good suggestions. To follow up on the chair's admonition that this is a process that we're going to have to keep going, and I mentioned this in the briefing, but it's something I'd like perhaps for us to follow up on, is certainly it was a year ago that I just got back from my stint watching the outages and all that went with it. And I think perhaps in retrospect, one of the most frustrating parts of it was the whole staging, processing, lodging part of the whole event. Getting those crews to the area was one huge issue, but then getting them to the point where they could work in the area ended up being word of mouth, 7 or 8 hours of processing time before some of the trucks could actually get there. Staging areas were designed for kind of the traditional storms, and then when you had this superstorm where you got many more crews than anybody ever envisioned, I know there was a lot of creative on-the-run staging going on, which is great, but obviously I think we could do more there. And then just finding lodging for some of these people was, people were driving 100, 125 miles to do the work, which means they're not stringing lines, they're driving in trucks. And all of it seemed to be done on an individual utility basis. Con Ed took care of Con Ed, LIPA took care of LIPA, maybe O&R and Con Ed worked together, NYSEG worked with and especially where upstate, where NYSEG and National Grid service territory interlock so much, and downstate where 4 or 5 different utilities serve customers. I would hope there might be some opportunities to improve that in the future. And I know that wasn't the charge this time around. I'm just suggesting it as a follow-up set of work that we might consider, because that was frustrating watching trucks sitting in a parking lot sometimes when the crews were ready to go.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about idle time in the next item. But I think we share your concern with that, and somehow we need to get the utilities to work together to try to improve that process. Obviously, there's been lessons learned from last year, and they've implemented some of them, but I'm not sure that they've shared it across each other as much as it might be useful to do.
And I know that was not the charge of this item, so I'm saying this not as any way as a criticism, but as a follow-up.
I think just to add a point to that, I think the whole issue, as I saw it, of access and road access, even with the access to inventory, I think we're going to need to continue to look at, because as I recall from reading the Moreland report and some of the concerns that got raised is the fact that people weren't contemplating how do you deal with the fact when you have roads down, you have crews trying to get in, and things like that. So I think there's a broader issue of, how do you get people to where they can go to solve problems, and if you have inventory, How will we know? I mean, well, obviously there, but are we going to coordinate with the roads and make sure that people can get to the inventory and get it out where it needs to go as well? So I'm sure there's, for every resolution, there's probably 10 set of questions that we're gonna have to continue to think about.
I do know the question about the logistics in and of itself is something that they're talking about on this National Response Event Group, and trying to see how they can share that kind of stuff. But I think there are opportunities for doing that within New York as well. So.
Let me just turn to Commissioner Eckenpour.
Thank you. Mike, if you would also elaborate a little on how we deal with NIPA and LIPA and the ISO, as we don't regulate them, but what is their participation and the encouragement to work with the utilities on this also?
Go ahead.
Okay, as a practical matter, NISO doesn't have a big role in this because they don't really own equipment that's shared and stuff. But they do have a role in terms of coordination, what's going on and stuff. So they are participating. They been very cooperative in what they've done with this. With regards to LIPA, they're participating, and I do think we kind of have a hook into them down the road with the change in our participation with them, and we actually have talked to them some about some of the things we're doing in New York, and I think they're receptive to some of that stuff. I think they're going to have some new ideas, maybe different ideas, and we get kind of like an old boys club to some extent. People have seen stuff going, and a lot of the same people, and I think they may give a fresh perspective that maybe we can learn from, and I think we're looking forward to that.
I would anticipate with public service that we're going to hear some of the practices from New Jersey as well.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Experiences there moving into New York.
Just let me elaborate on the ISO involvement. Last year during Sandy, obviously the ISO was monitoring all the bulk power systems and the generating stations, and they have kept us up to date daily or even more frequently than that. And at times they've asked us for our help when the generating stations were down, and to the extent there were state actions that could be taken to help, they did reach out to us, and we did reach out to the right authorities here. So it was a pretty cooperative working relationship. And
NIPA's, they're totally voluntary, but they've been very cooperative. They've been right in the mix of this stuff. It's something. It's kind of like the mutual assistance.
Right.
NIPA's not really that involved in the mutual assistance because they don't have the kind of crews that are normally shared. They've got transmission crews. But on other matters, there's stuff done in the state, and they participate, and this is one of them.
Just elaborate on the NIPA front too. Last year they did help getting all the public power companies to assist, reached out beyond New York, beyond the country, in fact, and helped in the restoration efforts. So.
Well, I know in one instance during Superstorm Sandy, American Water Company had a problem with a large truck that somehow had landed on top of a manhole cover and was slowly sinking as everything was flooding. And they did not have the equipment, and actually the Office of Emergency Management was very quick to deploy a piece of equipment to come and help out with that problem. So, as the chair said, this is a continuing, ongoing process. I mean, after every storm, we always find out new information, things we can do better, but I think we're off to a good start here. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Sayre.
Well, we're talking about follow-up, and again, this is an item for the future and not something that's really directly part of this item that you've presented. I heard loud and clear from a number of telecom companies after the storm that their biggest problems were unstandardized credentials, so that in particular cable TV companies and to a lesser extent the cellular companies were having trouble getting past the police lines because they weren't being recognized as critical utilities, which they are increasingly in today's world, and access to fuel for all utilities. I think there's some opportunities of working together, not just with the electric companies, but across all of the utilities in case there's a shortage of diesel or gasoline, as there certainly was with Sandy.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, any?
I mean, that's something we certainly will look at going forward.
Okay. Commissioner Berman?
Thank you for your presentation, Michael. I am struck by this item in clearly, this started, the initial was with the storm and looking at the different items. But March 13th, you entered into the collaborative working with folks. And as you said throughout this, that the utilities are already stepping up and doing many of these things. And this will be something that they will continue to have a significant focus on. This is very, very important, and I think the fact that you engaged, the staff engaged with the utilities and looking at what they're doing, not only with their own utility, but with each other and then with neighboring states so that there can be sharing is very important. Do you do actual on-site visits to these locations?
We've been to many of them. We didn't do any specific ones as a result of this, but in our past travels, we've been to many of them.
Okay, that's very helpful, I think. And I just am very supportive of continuing the dialogue and working with them, and to the extent it is appropriate for standardization, I think that's a good thing. Obviously, there will be things that are not able to be standardized, and I appreciate that there's a recognition of that and working with the utilities. So thank you. Good job.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of follow-up questions.
Okay.
Could you just elaborate on Section 70, what we're doing there, either you or Mr. McGowan?
Mr. McGowan will do that. Thank you.
Yes, Section 70 requires the Commission to approve the transfer of works or systems. And during a crisis where they're trying to transfer this inventory, this item recommends that the Commission give pre-approval to that so that they can more efficiently transfer these assets consistent with the public service law in a crisis event. And I think the entire regime that we have here facilitates that, and the accounting practices will facilitate doing that in a manner that is consistent with ratepayers' interests.
Great. And that would also apply to inventory at vendors?
Yes.
Okay.
This isn't high-tech stuff we're generally talking about.
You're talking about just raw material,
yes.
Cable and...
Cable, poles,
right.
Small transformers, not the big ones, small ones.
And then a couple things. One is that I think, as Commissioner Berman said, I do think the concept of uniformity would be great. I understand, having gone through 2 mergers with utilities, when you have different operating companies, it's challenging because what people are used to. But if you don't start, you'll never end. You'll never get there. So I think we need to continue to work on where we can get that uniformity, because it helps quite a bit. And then it just seems to me that a lot of the concern that we're hearing, and I think we are, as we've said, this is a marathon, and it's going to be one we continue to run, but is around logistics. And I think we've done a great job, but I'm wondering, and I'd like staff to consider it and then come back to us, if whether or not we should be thinking about just the whole issue of logistics, not just related to the electric utilities, but also the telecom, moving people, lodging. Have we had it, covered off? Are there other things we should be doing? Maybe thinking about a further technical conference next year around these areas, and where we can think about a best practice sharing. Because it seems to me that certainly doesn't matter if it's telecom, water, electric, roads. It's just getting people where they need to go. So, but with that, thank you very much for a well-done report. I'd like to ask for a vote then on item 202. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, then turning to the next item is item number 301. Am I right? Yes. And is that you again?
That's me again.
Go ahead.
So good morning, Chair Zibelman.
Thank you.
Thank you. The scorecard was developed in the context of changes this past spring to the Public Service Law, which require increased oversight of utility emergency planning and response, including a new authority for the Commission to assess civil penalties against the utilities. Staff has actually been considering the concept of a scorecard for several years. I think this was in the aftermath of Long Island City back in 2006. And we've been working on some concepts about this since that time. But this work was accelerated and deepened by our experience with Superstorm Sandy and Tropical Storms Lee and Irene. The scorecard is a new and quantitative tool for measuring utility preparation for, performance during, and response to storms, natural disasters, and other events which cause major outages. It's one of the first of its kind in the country and is an innovative response to the difficulties which may be associated with the evaluation of utility storm response. I would note that it's untested and it's likely to evolve as we gain more experience with its results. It is meant to drive future performance in utility storm response and resiliency. In addition, I would note, I think Raj touched on this earlier, it would not supplant our existing reliability performance mechanisms. Those are more blue sky things that are more controllable by the utility. We have indices for frequency and duration, the SAFE-KD that we're always talking about, of performance. And that doesn't include the major storm events are excluded from those metrics. And the reason for that is you lose the underlying performance if you're just looking at storm events. So that's why we do that. And those metrics themselves are just not suitable for measuring performance during a storm. Now, I would note that this was a pretty wide effort, staff from not only OEGW, but Office of General Counsel, Office of Consumer Policy, Office of Consumer Services, Office of Accounting and Finance, and Office of Regulatory Economics participated in this development. I want to give you a quick overview of the proposed scorecard. It's based on a total of 1,000 points. There was no really rhyme or reason to that other than it made it easier to add up as opposed to being 100 points. There are three primary categories that we have in the scorecard: preparation, operational response, and communication. Obviously, if a utility doesn't prepare and take steps initially before a storm is coming, when they know that it's coming, or just have their plans in place, then they're not going to perform as well. We found that operational response clearly is important in restoring service, but communication is also critically important. And if they can do a great job in restoring service, and if they communicate poorly, they didn't do a very good job. We have a breakdown of the points just to give you a sense of the relative importance of the categories. Preparation is 150 points, and that was increased from what the scorecard that was released for notice in response to the parties. It was previously 100 points. Operational response is 550 points. That was previously 600. We took a few points out of that, shifted it in preparation. And communication is 300 points. Now, I would point out that estimated times of restoration are part of the operational response category, and that's probably one of the more significant categories we have. So even though it looks like operations is more than communication, if you consider the ETR stuff, they're pretty evenly balanced in terms of importance. We would calculate a scorecard result for each major storm that's where customers are out for 3 or more days, and that's consistent with the regulation Part 105 that we have that requires the utilities to file a report with the Commission whenever there are outages more than 3 days. In the attached order, the Commission would direct the utilities to provide staff with the data that will allow staff to compute what the score is for the metrics. It's important to point out we're not just looking at this 1,000 points, but we're looking at the various metrics within that stuff. So, as we develop a scorecard, it's going to be a total evaluation of how they perform in each of the different categories. The Part 105 reports would still be filed within 60 days. I just want to give you a quick overview of the process we've had thus far. Initially, the scorecard was put out for comment in April initially. We got comments from New York City and from the joint utilities. We had a series of meetings with those two parties, and then in August you put the scorecard out for further comment. Subsequent to that, we received additional comments from the joint utilities and New York City. Again, we met with them in an effort to try to address their concerns to the extent we could, and then we have the revised draft, which is before you today. I'd like to just walk through the comments and tell you how we recommend they be handled. For the New York City comments, there were really three comments. First, New York City would like to have more events evaluated under the scorecard than what staff proposed. They suggest a three-prong approach for the trigger. One is duration, whereas we're saying 3 days, they'd like it to be 24 hours. And then they have two categories. One is if 2.5% of the customers within an operating area are out of service, it would kick in the scorecard. And then a third if service is interrupted to 1% or more of the customers for 12 hours. So that's kind of a combination percentage and duration. Staff is concerned that if we implement this three-pronged approach, that it would be implementing a scorecard inappropriately. A lot of the measures that are in there are really geared towards these longer events. And we would also, probably implement the scorecard quite a few times, and it would be very difficult for not only us to evaluate it, but for the utilities to provide the data for us. We looked at a period of several years, and we'd be using the scorecard something like 80 times. And this is really set up and geared for these larger events. So, at this time, we think it's appropriate to stick with the 3 days. And we can certainly reevaluate that as we get more experience with it. One change, though, in response to the city that we do recommend is that we change the threshold for network outages. We currently have, as part of our RPM for Con Edison, a metric in there for major outages. And major outages for the networks are defined as any time there's customers out to 15% or more of the network for a period of 3 hours or more. So what that does is it kind of gets away from a short-term switching type thing, but it focuses on significant outages there. And 15% of a network outage is in Con Ed's territory is significant, I can assure you. Now, we recognize the scorecard would have to be, flexible because many of the metrics in the scorecard would not apply for a network event. They don't do the same kind of reach out for mutual assistance and all that. And that's just something we'll have to learn with and deal with during those events. But the communication is critical in those kind of networks events. And so for that reason, we recommend that lower threshold for the networks. The city also asked to add a resiliency category, although they didn't necessarily they didn't suggest the metric to do that. We think the scorecard is designed to drive performance and hopefully drive improvements in resiliency. And if it doesn't, then we probably need to tweak it to include things that do drive resiliency. So for now, we recommend leaving it as it is, but recognizing it's a learning tool. If we learn more, we'll respond to that. And then finally, the city wants to apply the scorecard to gas and steam restoration performance. And, on the surface, that sounds like a good idea because performance is important in whatever industry you're in. But, right now we really have the more experience in electric, and we're going to try to see how this thing works in electric. And, down the road, it's something we could consider recommending to you. So the time really right now is such that we think that the focus should remain on electric. I just want to talk through some of the comments that the joint utilities had. And we've had, I will say, we've had numerous meetings with the joint utilities, both in response to the April one and in response to the August filing. We met with them, like every 2 weeks we were meeting with them on this. And then on the odd week we were meeting with them on emergency plans. So we've been getting a lot of face time with the utilities. On wires down, the new public service law requires a 36-hour response time for wires down. For the utilities. In the scorecard, we have, for shorter outages, the ones 3 to 5 days long, we put in a threshold of 18 hours. And the reason we did that is that we feel in those shorter events that they should be able to respond in that amount of time. So, it's scorecard is driving performance that, doesn't have to just meet what's in the law. That's staff's view on that. The joint utilities also say there are too many points assigned to performance which exceeds expectations. And staff doesn't agree with that. We're really trying to drive performance. We're not just trying to get meets expectations. So we want to try to push the utilities on that. They want less subjectivity in the measurement criteria. And, we totally agree with them. We want as little subjectivity as we can. And we've met with them. We've tried to refine them. Some things that they think are subjective, we don't think they're that subjective. So, we're trying to do that. We agree with their goal. And, while I'm not sure it's exactly what they want, we made improvements in those areas. They wanted to increase the preparation category. They just think it's more critical than the points we previously had, and we've done that. The muni call measure, we have a metric in there for the muni calls, and it's probably one that's on the surface appears to be more subjective than the others. We've had some ratings. We rate them as being the calls as being effective and highly effective, and that does involve some judgment. But we're pretty comfortable with that. We have people since the muni calls started, and this was back in like 2006 time period, based on something that NYSEG undertook. Our staff people monitor these calls all the time. They're on the calls. We're just listening, observing, seeing how they're going. And I think our staff has really developed a pretty good feel for whether the calls are doing what they mean to do. So while on the surface that does require judgment and it is subjective to an extent, I think we can do a pretty good job with it. The utilities want 60 days to submit scorecard data instead of the 30 that we recommend. This is mostly just data, and we recommend you stick with the 30 days. Frankly, the utilities need this data in order to be able to do their evaluation of their own performance. So, we feel like in order for them to do the 60-day report, they're going to need this data in 30 days anyway. So we recommend sticking with that. And there's always an opportunity that they can ask for an extension if there's extenuating circumstances. Finally, on crewing, the utilities do not want the crewing metric to apply to this what we're calling national response event, the national event when the big thing kicks in. And, that's an area we really don't agree with them. I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing we're trying to capture here. So, I think some of their concerns is that they don't have as much control over what's going on when it's a national response event. But, they need to do what they need to do to make sure they respond appropriately. The utilities want to eliminate training metrics. We do have a training requirement in Part 105, the regulation. This training metric that we have in here actually goes beyond that. And it basically says if the utilities identify, we're not telling them what training to do beyond what's in Part 105, but if you have training programs, you need to carry them out. So it's pretty straightforward. I talked earlier, I mentioned something about idle time. We had an idle time metric in this. And, we do have a significant concern about idle time, and it's something we really need to work on. But it's not something that's very measurable. And, to ask them to send people out to monitor people for that, for the purpose of this metric, we think is probably too burdensome right now. I think we need to try to figure out other ways to deal with the idle time thing. So that's something we're going to be reporting on to you in the future. And then finally, utilities want to use 2 times the I'm not even sure I can follow my own note on this. They want to use a different safety metric. They want to use a safety metric that's based on their actual performance. And what we've done in the safety thing, safety is very important, but we try to narrow the focus so it's just a small window of types of very serious accidents that involve actually working on facilities. Okay, so that's the narrow focus that we have here, and we have, we set it at 0 because we're just not comfortable saying, hey, it's okay for you to have 4 of these kind of injuries. So that needs to be their goal. If they don't meet it, well, we'll deal with that going forward. But we certainly want to send a message that the goal is no serious injuries. So, in closing, the scorecard will provide guidance to the Commission for assessing performance as well as to the utilities in assessing their own performance. I want to emphasize again, I know I've touched on it, but this is a new undertaking. As such, we expect to learn more as we implement the scorecard. And I fully expect we'll be reporting back to you on the effectiveness of the scorecard the first time we have a significant event. So hopefully that won't be very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So let me just start I know that this is a tremendous effort. Any company that's looking at developing a scorecard for internal purposes of managing the organization normally hires consultants and pays them hundreds of thousands of dollars to help them do this type of work, and it's a huge effort to start thinking about it. I think that one of the things that we know from good business practices, the adoption of Six Sigma across most industries, is the recognition that if you don't measure it, you won't excel. And since we're looking at excellence at a critical time, it's incredibly important for us to have a thoughtful approach on how things should go when we are in an emergency. And one thing I think we all know that the utility industries cares, thinks about, and often performs at its best in emergencies. But what we're dealing now with is extreme situations. And the ability for the industry to adapt and to adopt practices to deal with these extreme situations requires us to set back and say, well, what are the metrics? What are the outcomes we want to achieve? So to me, even though this is a big step forward, I think from the perspective of where we want to drive the whole process of regulation and thinking about what are the outcomes we want to achieve, it becomes a great measure of what are the desirable outcomes and have we achieved it. One of the other aspects, and I applaud you for recognizing this, is that any time you're setting up a scorecard or a KPI, one of the big questions you always have to ask yourself is, I know I want to have the outcome. I think these are the metrics I have to use to be able to get to that outcome. But once I measure it and I'm not achieving that outcome, maybe I have the wrong metrics. And I think it's going to be very important that we all are adults and professional about this and start thinking about this as we think we've got the right metrics today, but we won't know until we start using them and applying them and determining, are we measuring the right things? And if we're not, then we need to all step back and say, okay, what do we want to measure? Because it's easy to set the outcome. It's harder to see what is the drivers that are going to get us there. And I think the other thing that I think that you've identified and is really standard is to think about the 80-20 rule, which is basically 80% of the problems you're going to solve are by 20% of the efforts. And I think understanding that we can measure everything, but we don't need to measure everything. We need to find the critical few that are going to be most important to drive the results that we want to get, and we'll continue to work toward getting that critical few. Once we get there, I think, and as we're starting to proceed and looking at gas and telecom, it will be, I think, valuable to think about, does this process help us drive to results and have outcomes that people want to achieve? And I think that sets the tone of where we want to go, where we're all on board. We all know where we want the outcomes to be. We want to know the results we want to get. And now we're going to start thinking, well, what are the things that we need to excel at to drive those results? I would think that to a person, every utility executive, telecom executive in this room would say, I run my business that way. So there's probably no reason why we wouldn't want to drive this aspect of our business, which we realize is so critical, to do the same way. So I think this is a great effort. I hope that it becomes actually a standard that other regulatory agencies look at as to how to drive results and how utilities can start thinking about where does excellence lie when it comes with storm preparedness and reactions to storms. So thank you, and let me open it up for further comments. I'll start this way. Commissioner Sayre, did you want to go?
This is a terrific effort, and I applaud staff for all the work that's gone into it. And I can say this is already achieving national attention. I've had a call from one commissioner in another state who asked for a copy the minute we release it and expressed some interest in taking the words New York off of the document and slapping the name of that commissioner's state on instead.
Can we charge for that?
Thank you. So I very much appreciate the efforts of this, and I think it's a really good thing to listen to all the efforts that are being done to get it right. I really look forward to your hard work. That I'm sorry you're going to have a lot on your plate with all of different things, because this is untested. And it is something that is really one tool, and I think it's an important tool. And I think what I'm hearing from you is staff is cognizant of the fact that it's untested, and looking at it in the rollout, and reporting back to the commission how it's working, and being flexible with what's happening on the ground that may need some changes or some understanding of what it's doing. So I think it's it's a great thing because it does have an ability for us to see if things are going well, and to make sure that everyone's using this one tool as well as others to get to a good result. So I think this is very, very good. I'm very happy to hear that staff is cognizant of the flexibility that's needed, because it is a new tool and instrument that we will be using. And because I know, Michael, that part of why you're so good at your job is that you really do listen to what's happening and what needs to be utilized to do some of this implementation and the rollout. I do know that this is just for the electric utilities, and I think that that's a good thing, especially because it is new and untested. I think it's very important that we don't try to fit, at this point, other utilities, the round peg in a square hole. Did I get that saying right? And that we really look, I know, Raj, in your introductory comments, you talked about the fact that industries are at different stages in the evolution of this process. And there are reasons why we don't treat each utility the same, each sector. And I think that why there may be certain things that overlap that we can look at. I think it is important to really focus on what works and why we're doing something. And you explained very nicely, Raj, in your introduction, why there was such a focus on the electric. And this, I think, is an important tool. So I appreciate it, and I really do want to hear how it's working. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Akinpora?
Thank you, Mike. That was an excellent presentation, and I'll be honest, when I first heard about the scorecard, I really scratched my head wondering how the heck you were ever going to get this, something before us. But as usual, you deliver to us a very worthy product, and one that has the most important component that I think is my favorite word, flexibility, so that we know as we take those steps and we have other emergencies that we can adjust to make sure that the scorecard, will be working. I do want to ask, when you started doing this, did you look in to see what other states, if any other state had any scorecard or a process like this?
We're not aware of any other state that does. We are aware a couple of utilities in New York that had some elements of this. Mm-hmm. That we used as a foundation, but obviously we didn't have. We asked the utilities if they're aware of any in other states, but we didn't really get any feedback on that.
So I really think
statewide,
it's to your credit and the staff's credit, Raj, and everybody who worked on this, that we do blow our own horn, and New York has stepped forward as a leader in making sure that we address these emergencies with a proper matter of the scorecard, which I think, as Commissioner Sayer has said, other people will hear about this and they will be excited, and hopefully this will go all around the country, and so that, again, consumers and municipalities and the public at large will be better protected, and the utilities will work more efficiently. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brown?
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for the work here. This is a tremendous tool, and I'm going to emphasize the word tool, and I think you've been emphasizing that. Since I've been here, we've had probably dozens of these events, and after the events, we get a lot of review of the event, and we get a lot of both qualitative information and a lot of statistics that is difficult to put in the context of anything. And this provides us, I think, the ability to put things into a context. I'm going to ask a very facetious question, which I think you know the answer to. Is a score of 711 good or bad? We don't know that yet. And so we're not trying to develop a tool here that we know all the answers. We're developing a tool that provides us some quantitative context, and we're going to have to figure out what to do with that along the way. And I just also want to ask the utilities to get back to us in a hurry. If they feel any pressure to respond to the scorecard and not the event, I think we want to know that very, very quickly. We want them responding to the event, and we hope that the scorecard measures their efficiency in responding to the event, not vice versa. And so as we learn to use this tool, I really ask the utilities not to feel pressured that the first time through that there's going to be some, Peter mentioned, I think somebody mentioned the word penalties already. We've got a long way to go before we're going to be able to take this tool and figure out whether that's a situation that requires some action on the part of the Commission. So I ask the utilities' cooperation here and get back to us if they feel that pressure in any way to get a 713 instead of a 709.
Thank you, Gary. We have had discussions with them about we want to make sure this doesn't create perverse incentives, and so that's important to keep our eye on that. And we'll have to do that during events.
Thank you. So I think that the message is clear. I think we all agree on. Am I not on?
I just wanted to acknowledge that Peter McGowan was one of the first staff members who floated this idea of scorecard.
So he's the person we'll blame if it doesn't work? Yeah. I figured that's how we got to 1,000, because I know lawyers need round numbers. But I do think that while this is a new tool for us to be using, it's a tool that businesses and organizations, even the state, uses, which is if you don't measure it, you can't exceed. And what we need to do is make sure we're measuring, and then we're looking and seeing, are we measuring the right things? And I think that's what happens, and the objectivity allows us now then to start looking at, are these the elements and that are going to get us the outcome. So it's a tremendous effort, and I do think that it's a type of thing that people look at New York to do, to start lead by example, and that's exactly what we're doing. So with that, let me ask for a vote. All those in favor of the recommendation to approve the scorecard for use as a guidance document to assess electric utility response to significant outages as described by Michael, please say aye. Aye. Hearing no opposition, and if no opposition, the recommendation is adopted. Congratulations, and you're off the hot seat. So, well, for the moment. Returning to the next item, it's third item for discussion, which is item 201. And that's the customer outage credit policies and other consumer protection policies relating to prolonged electric or natural gas services outages. Doug Elfner, who is the Director of Consumer Policy, will be presenting this. Doug, why don't we get started?
Good. Thank you, Chair Zebelman, and thank you, Commissioners. Good morning. Shortly after Superstorm Sandy, the Commission asked staff to develop a consistent statewide policy governing customer outage credits, the application of late payment charges, and other consumer protections as they relate to prolonged electric or natural gas service outages, as well as how the costs of those outages costs of those policies, including lost revenues, should be recovered. The Commission noted that in response to previous prolonged outages, there had been some variation in how utilities had addressed these issues, and the Commission asked for a policy to help ensure consistency among outage events and among utilities. So staff developed a proposed uniform policy and issued the proposal for comment. We also presented this issue at a Commission session several months ago. We subsequently received another round of comments. Joint utilities were mostly concerned about the practical ability to administer these policies, as well as they wanted us to be very cognizant of the costs associated with the policies. New York City asked that the policies not be too narrow, be broadened to the extent possible. So we considered all these policies, and again, as Mike said, with the scorecard project, this is a real team effort. Just about every office in the department is represented here in contributing to this product. The recommendation before you is that the Commission issue an order establishing policies that would be applicable as a result of prolonged electricity outages, which are defined as outages lasting more than 72 hours, as further defined in Part 105 of our regulations. Now, this threshold is exactly the threshold that Mike spoke about. Utilities respond to that threshold. When storms satisfy that threshold, utilities have to file reports demonstrating how they performed. The scorecard could be used as a tool, and also these consumer policies would be applicable. The policy contemplated in the draft order has two main parts. First, utility collection activities, including assessment of late payment charges and termination of service for non-payment, and second, regarding credits to customers who experience the prolonged outages. Regarding the first set of issues, the order establishes minimum requirements concerning suspension of certain business as usual utility activities related to credit and collection. For electric outages exceeding 3 days, collection-related activities such as service termination and assessment of late payment charges would be suspended for customers who experienced outages. Those suspensions would apply for a minimum of 1 week, measured from the time when the outages began. For rare events such as Superstorm Sandy, where there are widespread outages exceeding 3 days in duration and widespread disruption of transportation and mail delivery, the minimum protections would be broader. In those rare occasions, as determined by the Commission, the business as usual collection practices and late payment charges would be suspended for a minimum of 14 days for all residential customers located in the affected areas, as well as for other customers who have been affected by the emergency. The purpose of these policies is to provide customers affected by prolonged outages a reasonable amount of time to recover from the outages. The draft order also provides for flexibility, recognizing that there may be circumstances in which the protections or the duration of the protections should be modified. The second main issue is customer credits for electric utility customers who are out of service for a period exceeding 3 days, resulting from an emergency. Those customers would receive a credit on their customer charge proportionate to the number of days that the customer was out of service. The purpose of this policy regarding customer credits is to avoid the imposition of these charges to customers who did not receive service. The recommendation is also that the utilities absorb the lost revenue associated with these customer charge credits. This would require adjustment of the revenue decoupling targets for electric utilities, so that utility customers do not eventually pay when the RDM is operated. I'll repeat again that this policy is applicable to prolonged outages of electricity. When we began this proceeding, there was consideration of applying it to prolonged gas outages as well. As was mentioned earlier by Mike and Raj, prolonged gas outages are relatively infrequent. Superstorm Sandy was by far the worst experience that we've had in decades. In that case, there were approximately 20,000 customers that were out of gas service out of a population of about 4 million. So the recommendation is to address the consumer policies that would be applicable to prolonged gas outages on a case-by-case basis. As an aside, Commissioner Akampura and others have asked what other states are doing on this. We took a look at this as well and didn't find a whole lot. So one state that has a statewide policy for providing credits for all electric customers in prolonged outages. We see a couple other utilities here and there that have similar policies. But we believe New York would be the first to have not only a credit policy, but also a policy applicable to the other consumer protections. So in summary, the draft order responds to the Commission's request for a statewide policy. We believe the draft order is balanced, reflects policies that can be implemented by utilities, and reflects policies that are easy for the public to understand. In addition, adoption of the recommendation would provide regulatory certainty for utilities, as well as assurance for customers who are dealing with the aftermath of prolonged outages. So we're available for questions.
Thank you, Doug. And let me just start with, I think that from what I could tell, that in the aftermath of Sandy and other storms, oftentimes we would see utilities making, and I don't mean this in a pejoratory sense, but having to make ad hoc decisions on what to do, and senses of equity. And then, of course, when folks are in crisis, the last thing they want to worry about is, having to pay their electric bill. So I think having a standard approach to deal with this is very important, and it provides that certainty. And there's that balance. It's the balance of consumers' fair interest to not have to pay for product they're not receiving, and the need to have utilities that are financially stable. And I think we've achieved a balance. And it's a theme, as like everything else we're dealing with today. We'll continue to watch this space, make sure it's working as intended, and if not, we'll look for adjustments. So thank you for your work, and let me open this. Commissioner Akinpur, would you like to lead?
I'd be very happy to. Thank you, Doug. Could we just go back before this as to what the utilities, how you worked with the utilities on collections, and if this differs that much from how things were working?
Maybe Sandra would want to add something as well, but this proposed policy here is very close to what we did with the utilities in Sandy. It goes beyond, in terms of the credits, way beyond what we had done before then. Mm-hmm. So on the collection and credit activities, if Sandra wants to speak to that.
Sure, I'd be glad to answer that. I think starting in 2008, if you remember, we had about 5, am I right, Michael? 5 storms, I think, that year. It was 2008 was the big one. And we really started working with the utilities as to what they were doing in the field as these events occurred. And so we started working very closely with them to make sure that any time there was an event, they were looking out for what was going on with the customers. They need to move crews, so they're not going to have trucks rolling at that point. You don't want to have collection calls going in. But at the same time, you want to make sure the customers, once they're back up with their electric service running, that they have an opportunity to make payment plans to be able to pay their bills. So yes, we have been working very closely with the utilities. I think that this policy simply sets forth what they've been doing anyway, and clarifies, as Doug said, what's going to happen in extraordinary circumstances. And of course, we are always working with the utilities, regardless of the size of an event, to make sure they are implementing proper collection procedures, and will continue to do that. And customers always have an opportunity, whenever their financial circumstances change, regardless of whatever it is, to contact the utility and to make payment arrangements.
Yeah, I think that's important, that we've built upon, with this policy now, what we've done in the past, and to the credit of the utilities and to the department in working with them, so that this has really not been an effort that, there had to be a lot of pushing, tugging, and, carrying on. It's because it, basically had been done. But now we have a uniform policy, which I think is really important. And again, credit to New York to make sure that consumer protections are there for the public in general, and working well with our utility businesses. So thank you.
Commissioner Brown? Commissioner Berman?
I was very glad, Chair, to hear your comments on the policy, and making sure that if we look at it and see how it's working out in the field. I know that the consumer folks have been doing a great job working with the utilities and the customers, and making sure that we are addressing the needs that are there. And so I think it's a very good one in that we do have a now statewide policy, so there is some certainty. But at the same time, we're cognizant that we don't want to cause any negative. That this is supposed to be a positive, and so we really are glad that staff will be focused on that. And I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Sayre? Okay. So with that, if all those in favor then, and thank you, Doug and Sandra, for this, and all in favor of the recommendation to direct electric and gas, I'm missing this. All those in favor of the customer outage policies, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Hearing unanimous, so moved, and we will move forward. Thank you very much. Okay. Then the next item is item 101, which is natural gas emergency preparedness, and with Kevin Spiker, who's the Chief of Gas Safety. We'll be talking about that, and thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. Good morning. Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee, Superstorm Sandy, and the flooding in the Mohawk Valley have highlighted the need for more robust gas emergency plans. Hurricane Irene hit the state in August of 2011, followed a week later by Tropical Storm Lee in September. This caused over 11,500 natural gas service interruptions statewide. Prior to these events, it was rare for gas utilities to experience service interruptions of this scale. Superstorm Sandy made landfall downstate on October 29th, 2012. This storm caused an even larger disruption to gas service, as there was over 20,000 gas service interruptions. During this past July, the Mohawk River crested and devastated areas in upstate, particularly in Herkimer and Oneida counties. The severe flash flooding event caused over 3,000 natural gas service outages. To put these recent outages into perspective, there are about 3.2 million gas services in the state. Although we've seen dramatic increases over historic levels of outages during these recent events, by nature, the gas system is generally very resilient, but is negatively affected by water. Flooding causes damage to gas mains and to gas services. Each service regulator that has been submerged needs to be replaced. Appliances in affected areas need to be inspected because of potential safety hazards associated with appliances that were submerged. In addition, water intrusion into gas mains and services can have lingering effects, causing sporadic outages in the weeks and months following the event. These needed replacements and inspections add time to the restoration process. For example, in addition to the 25,000 outages seen during Sandy, 38,000 service regulators needed to be replaced, and approximately 20,000 low-pressure services needed to be inspected. During Sandy, a lot of the response and restoration was performed with mutual aid crews from across the country and Canada. One issue raised by Sandy relating to mutual aid involved waiving the requirements for the operator qualification of individuals performing covered tasks on pipeline facilities. Our gas safety regulations require the gas operators to have written procedures that prescribe the conditions under which persons may be qualified to perform certain covered tasks. These regulations add complexity to the mutual aid situations because they restrict a utility's ability to use personnel to those trained to their own home utilities plan, but not to the plan of the operator they will be assisting. At the November 2012 session, the Commission provided temporary relief of these requirements. This past September, the safety section held a pipeline safety seminar which included over 165 participants, including staff, PHMSA, which is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, and natural gas and hazardous liquid pipeline operator personnel from across the state. This 3-day seminar included sessions on lessons learned from recent storms and included breakout sessions in which the overall group broke into 5 smaller groups to discuss to discuss lessons learned and come up with best practices for emergency response activities. After the breakout sessions, each of the 5 groups reported back their results. Staff took the results from this seminar and combined with current state and federal requirements, PHMSA guidance including advisory bulletins specifically addressing emergency planning and response, and lessons learned from previous weather events, and developed a list of proposed gas preparedness best practices. The goal of these best practices is to have utilities begin to address storm-related issues such as system isolation, outage management, communications, training, implementation of the incident command system, and mutual aid prior to the next storm. Many of these best practices are already incorporated into current emergency plans. For example, the best practices ask the utilities to address issues such as qualification of mutual assistance prior to the next event. We don't want to assume that the Commission will grant relief from the operator qualifications for the next event, so we would like them to address these prior to the next event. We want them to increase communications with all stakeholders, including customers, mutual aid, local, county, and state government officials, and include these stakeholders in emergency drills when possible. We want them to look at adding critical valves to flood-prone areas to reduce the size of isolation zones so that interruptions of service can be minimized. We ask that the Commission order each gas utility to review its emergency plan in light of the proposed best practices, make revisions, and file revised plans within 60 days. LDCs and interested parties will also be invited to comment on staff's proposed best practices when the amendments to the plans are filed.
I want to just make sure that we put this in perspective. We've been working, all the gas utilities have emergency plans, and now what we're doing is specifically looking at, as part of that emergency planning to deal with weather events, large storms. Is that correct? So, and really what we've done now, and I think it's important, I think Raj said this at the beginning, we realize that we've been working very heavily with the electric utilities. And I think that in terms of the curve, in terms of thinking about these issues, we're further along on that curve than we are with gas. But that in coming up with these best practices, what we're doing is we're really identifying what with the proposal of staff is that the order will identify what the Commission thinks are best practices and invite the utilities to come back and let us know, is that right? Have we hit it right? Are there things that we should change? Am I getting this right? Is that how you think this will work through?
Yes.
So, and with this, and just like we've said with everything else, we're not so arrogant to think that we've got this. The staff is not suggesting it's so right that we've got this right the first time, and that it's our thoughts based on everything that's been heard and learned, and then getting some response back. So we are inviting, as I understand it, the order. We'll be inviting comments back, and for the utilities to really put their heads in it and say, this is what we think needs to be done. So that's how you're seeing this work
Yes, I think we have a good starting product, but we do need input from other interested parties.
Okay, and so I would encourage the utilities to think about this way. Again, like everything else, we're never going to get to excellence unless we start somewhere. And this, I think what staff is proposing is a great start. But we certainly invite further comments and discussion on this item, or at least I do. So I appreciate all the thinking, because like everything else, unless you have a straw man that people can shoot at, they won't shoot at anything. And I think this starts off as a very strong approach. So thank you very much for that. With that, let me open it for further comments. Commissioner Brum?
Yeah, Kevin, I think you kind of started with this point, and Mike alluded to it early, but, for my first 5 years here, we had what I would describe as tree events caused by wind, tree events caused by snow, tree events caused by ice. And the good news is tree events really don't affect the gas system very much because everything is undergrounded, and most of the time it withstands. Then in the last year, you pointed to at least 4, or last 2 years, at least 4 different major flooding events. And they cause a whole different set of issues, especially for the gas system. So you can't just simply take the experience from the electric system and say, let's now apply it to gas, because it's a whole different system and it's a whole different outage problem related, as you point to pipes and basement damage and the concerns that are there. So this, I think, is an outstanding effort of trying to, it's almost reinventing, emergency plans, because things that you do in the electric system just cannot be easily transferred to the gas system. And this is complicated balances that you're trying to maintain between reliability and safety and risk taking and what's the right thing to do. So I think it's an excellent thing that we get all our gas utilities thinking about this. Maybe we'll get lucky and won't see flooding events for another 5 to 10 years. But I don't want to count on luck, and I'd rather count on planning, and I think this is a really important effort. So as the chair points out, this is a starting point to get the discussion going, but I think it's an excellent starting point and really important that we think about our gas system vulnerabilities in a way we hadn't previous to what's happened in the last 2 years.
Thank you. And I do want to point out that the utilities or the gas industry and hazardous liquid industry were involved in the breakout sessions at the seminar in September, but they have not seen this final product, so it is important to get their feedback also.
Commissioner Ackman.
Thank you, Kevin, and I agree with everything that Commissioner Brown just stated. My concern is, and I hope it's taken into consideration, that when this comes again before us with some more recommendations, is that when we've seen the devastation of a gas system, that just fixing it, I don't think is good enough. I think that we have new technology today, that we want to make sure that it is improved upon rather than just plain fixed the old way. I think it's really important. I mean, gas is one of those issues that we said we can't accept anything other than zero tolerance for the safety of when there could be a gas problem.
National Grid out on Breezy Point, they did a lot of replacement out there, replacing old main with new main, and they upgraded the system, so that'll help to keep the water out of the system. They did miles, and we're not talking feet, they did miles on Breezy Point alone, but we're seeing the similar type of thing, and companies are well on their way to adding replacing leak-prone pipe in flooded areas.
Yeah, and we know the technology has improved since some of these systems were installed many, many, many years ago. So I would hope, again, that we use the most up-to-date technology to make sure that the system is hardened as best as possible.
Yes, and there's other technology that's being looked at specifically that will recognize services that are underwater and automatically shut off. So that's very promising. It's undergoing some testing, further testing.
Good. Let's lead again.
Thank you, Commissioner Sir. Commissioner Berman.
Thank you, Kevin. I didn't know you very well until a few days ago, and I'm sorry that you probably wish that still say the same, but I appreciate the work you're doing, and I know that out in the field people like working with you, even though you press them hard, and I think that's a good thing. I think that it's important for the process that there are now these staff-recommended best practices that folks, interested parties will be able to comment on. And I think this is really a question for Peter McGowan. Really seems like there's a few opportunities for comments, not only in the emergency plans, but in comments that they would have to the best practices at this point. And
there's definitely, I think this is a good evolution of this item to put these proposed best practices out, let the industry and others comment on them. At the same time, we are trying to get the gas utilities to amend their gas plans and move as far as they think they should be, because in the real world, we operate and we have to operate and we can't wait, and the plans are critical for them and us and other stakeholders to have in the event we have a situation. So there may be further opportunity to get comments on the plans after we've absorbed the amended plans and the comments on the best practices.
Okay. All right. So that's actually, it sounds like to me there's several layers then of opportunity. And if I understand it, normally the emergency plans, and I know it might be different for each utility, but generally when are the plans filed each year?
We require them to be reviewed annually, not to exceed 15 months, but generally that process takes place in January.
Mm-hmm. And do you work with them beforehand?
We would get their we would get the amended plans at least 30 days prior to implementation. So if we do have comments on them or suggestions, if they're not meeting current regulatory requirements, we would get back, give them feedback.
Okay, great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Commissioner, sir?
One question. I've been hearing some comments that sound like we're looking for comments from others than the utilities on our proposed best practices. Just as a technical matter, looking at the ordering paragraphs, I think we might want to add some provision for comments.
This was an idea that I think Commissioner Berman has been, and I finally kind of got it, that, we should be making these best practices available to a broader. So we're going to have to modify the words in the order to broaden it up, to invite comments, and we'll have to figure out what service list we use so that we serve this on a broader group. So yes, it will be revised to make sure we accommodate that.
So I mean, basically, I think from what we've heard, and I think Kevin and staff, you heard this sort of the concerns where we are. I think we're all, from what I believe, it's so incredibly important. And as Commissioner Akinpura said, this is one area where there has to be zero tolerance for safety problems, particularly if you think of the dreadfulness of a storm and having to worry about that. So having thought through what we need to do to be prepared and making certain that all the utilities have in place, I think provides that necessary focus. Again, unfortunately, it's the events of the past, of recognizing that the effect of flooding, and where people never thought about it because there always was trees down, that we have to deal with. And I think particularly now, as we look at gas extensions, as we're looking at converting from oil to gas, the importance of making certain that the gas system is safe and secure at all times has become even more important, more greater recognition. So appreciate this, and I think I look forward to the comments that from the parties and outside parties on how do we make this the best gas system in the country. So thank you very much. I'd like to take a vote then. So all those in favor of the recommendation to direct gas utilities to review their emergency plans in light of the recommended best practices, make revisions on filed revised plans within 60 days, as well as to comment as third parties on the best practices as has been described by Mr. McGowan and Kevin Spiker, please say aye. Aye. If hearing no opposition, and there being no opposition, the recommendation is adopted. Thank you. So the last next item that we're going to talk about is with respect to telecommunications. And Mike Rowley, who's our Chief of Network Reliability, is going to be addressing what we're proposing, what the staff is proposing to do there. So thank you, Mike, and let's go forward.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Item 501 provides the overview of the telecommunications network restoration following Sandy. As we've heard, Sandy was probably the most significant weather event to hit New York State. Certainly, the impact in the metropolitan New York City area and Long Island was of particular concern. And as we heard earlier, that is the area of the state where there is the most concentrated underground telecommunications network. So it did have a severe impact on not only the landline traditional telephone networks, but also the cable television, TV, and video and voice networks, and also the wireless network. The slide shows some of the damage that occurred and the resulting service loss. Again, there was extensive storm surge damage. This is something that we've I wouldn't call it a new phenomenon, but it was just of a scope and scale that we're not used to. Water inundation caused a lot of cable and electronics damage, and we did experience wind damage, mostly on Long Island, that took down poles and cabling, causing outages. One of the bigger problems or challenges for telecommunications companies was the loss of commercial power. So not only were they dealing with their own physical damage to their network, but the reliance on commercial power caused some outages. But as we did experience, the ones that were caused by commercial power, those services restored quickly thereafter when power was restored. So the resulting service impacts, there was well over 500,000 landlines at peak out of service. Our subsequent analysis probably puts that up even higher to about 700,000. We also saw a significant impact to the wireless network. Approximately 25% of the network in the affected areas in New York City, Long Island, and Westchester were out of service at one point during the storm and the days following, and that's about 3,500 cell sites. Again, primarily it was power and also the backhaul communications networks that the wireless industry relies on was an issue. On the cable side, there was extreme outages. Nearly 2.5 million subscribers out at peak, but that was immediately following the storm, and those restored quickly when power was restored, except for some of the more subscriber drop lines and cables that had to be fixed. But that was certainly not as bad as the power loss which caused those outages. Despite the damage sustained by the telecom networks and the resulting impacts, what we experienced following Sandy and some of the other big storms was the massive emergency response, and the need for emergency communications became critical. And just as an overview, staff also oversaw some of the long-term restorations following in the months after Sandy. Again, the areas that are primarily underground, Lower Manhattan, some of the outer boroughs, and Long Island, required a more long-term restoration. If there's a silver lining to the storm, it was that in some areas we saw the accelerated migration from copper to fiber, which certainly will improve overall network resiliency going forward. And also, it allows customers more advanced services. The next slide shows we tried to plot the restoration of electric with some of the telecom segments. The observation here, as I spoke about, is the reliance of cable on power. You saw that those the trend in restoration mirrored that of electric. So you had a lot of outages in the beginning, and then it followed the electric restoration path. As far as the industry segments, wireless, even though they took a big hit in their capacity in the beginning, we saw a rather quick restoration. That's mainly due to their ability to provide portable power when they could get into access areas, and also bypass some of the backhaul problems they were experiencing. If you want to go to slide 4, it shows some of the wireless restorations and outages by county. And you see some of the areas that were really hit hardest were Nassau and Staten Island. But as the crews got in there to provide portable generation, we saw significant improvements in a short time. The other interesting little blip there was a week later when Nor'easter Athena hit, and it caused additional outages, and companies had to shut down their temporary solutions in order to protect their facilities. But then, as that passed, the quick restoration followed. If you want to go to slide 5 there. Some of the highlights that staff observed during the restoration, there was minimal impact on the 911 network. That was key, for emergency responders and for the public. Those who did have dial tone were able to call 911, and that's in large part due to some of the initiatives that this commission put in place over a decade ago with regard to network diversity and powering for standalone requirements for critical facilities. Staff provide a lot of assistance at the State Office of Emergency Management and assisting FEMA. There was a huge multi-state and federal agency response. Again, the massive deployment of mobile communications apparatus to support their emergency response. Companies were requested, or we saw a lot of deployment of the cows and the colts and cellular charging stations. That was big, and some of the Wi-Fi hotspots that were set up in areas where there was a complete lack of communications ability. So staff spent a considerable amount of time assisting the State Office of Emergency Management in handling the hundreds of requests that that came in for mobile assets, and you just can't ask for these things. There's a lot of coordination just to get them into the theater, so to speak, and then coordinate with the landline and the power companies to make sure that the backhaul support is there to provide those emergency services. We witnessed significant company workforces and materials deployed following Sandy. Staff felt that companies generally did a pretty good job in that regard. But as Commissioner Sayer mentioned earlier, there were some challenges. In many instances, repair technicians experienced difficulties accessing damaged areas and obtaining fuel to replenish generators. There was also some issues, especially out Long Island, in repairing some of the ancillary damage when some of the power companies and others and municipalities would cut into lines that were already fixed, and the need for coordination became apparent. Another positive that we saw were companies expanded their use of interim services to customers just to maintain connectivity. So despite their impairments to the network, connectivity was sustained with things like free call forwarding, wireless home phone connect, and data packages were given to customers, most of them free of charge, while the companies restored their networks. We also observed improved communication with customers during the event through the expanded use of social media, websites, and texting. And then after the first couple of weeks and months of the storm restoration, staff then began to focus its efforts on the long-term reconstruction that was being done in New York City and Long Island. This slide just shows some of the observations that were apparent, some of them before the storm, but certainly highlighted during the storm and after. Resilient communication networks are essential to emergency responders and citizens during storms. Just the ability to, given the devastation, the ability just to connect and to, tell people you're okay. I mean, that's the most important thing to some people following a storm. We also saw the increased interdependence of the communications and electric networks. And, it used to be telephone relied on electric, and now we're seeing that electric relies on telecommunications more than ever. So there's mutual benefits to be had with better coordination. Wireless networks, obviously, they rely heavily on their landline communications partners. So we saw some of the diversity there that really helped during the storm. And again, we can't stress this enough. The communication and coordination between the utility segments is really necessary for efficient restorations. The next slide. Following the months, early in the year, we started to gather the information necessary to put together our report. It included some of the real-time outage information we were getting from companies, our duties at the State Office of Emergency Management. We also conducted several inspections on Long Island and New York and throughout the state of damage by our field inspection unit. And then in the spring, we asked companies to provide us their post-storm assessments, which were received by about 16 companies. All the major telecom, cable, and wireless companies participated in that. And one of the other events that was mentioned earlier that was instrumental was the technical conference among telecommunications and electric utilities that was conducted in May, and that should be 2013, where the representatives from all these industries just got together and talked and said, hey, can we do this better? And without the the regulatory stigma to it, it was just an open conversation, and I think we're starting to see some of the benefits of that already. Based on all the information that we received, we came up with some of our recommendations, mostly, again, on emergency plans and coordination. We expect that the emergency plans of not only the telephone companies but the cable and wireless segments will incorporate some of the operational improvements and lessons learned from the storm. We know that the companies are reviewing their abilities to their inventories for portable generation and manpower, and the other big thing is refueling contracts. And as Mike mentioned earlier, these are best done under blue sky conditions, and we know that there are some improvements there. You want to go to the next one? Again, the coordination with electric utilities, which is already underway. One of the big things that the companies addressed at that conference was the ability or the need to identify critical infrastructure that might need priority restoration. And it requires a real honest look at your network and to say, hey, I need this cell site up. If it's covering a big a large area or even a small area, but where that service is critical, so that we could improve some of that priority of the restoration. I think what Commissioner Brown mentioned does still occur. There's a bit of a siloing that goes on, and everyone's just focused on their own network. But we really need a little bit more coordination. The other thing that came up and is being worked on is the sharing of outage information. Telecommunications companies, because of their reliance on electric, there's the good and the bad, they're able to detect outages all the way to the customer prem. I know companies are working on protocols to work with the electric industry to improve their situational awareness when there are wide-scale outages. We also, companies should be reviewing their backup capabilities. Battery backup and fuel cell technologies have advanced just in the last 2 years, and we would expect companies to pursue that. I note that some companies have already taken steps to redesign their low-lying critical facilities above flood levels. Others have made investments in additional equipment, such as the generators and microwave equipment, and other tools to enhance their network stability during storms. Companies are also using advanced fuel cell technologies to improve service and data center resiliency, and they're doing it in a much more environmentally friendly way. So that's another positive. Next one. I think. With regard to interaction with with customers, maybe the previous slide, there are some improvements we think companies could make with regards to clarifying outage credit policies. That's something that I think the telephone and cable companies, we have it defined better in our regs, but it was a little unclear with some of the cellular companies. And again, there's always improvement that's needed with outage reporting, real-time outage reporting during an event. It's a little frustrating when you have to chase down companies and to get real-time information when you're trying to support the emergency response. And then finally, the last slide. So what are the next steps? We intend to post our report and have companies respond to staff on the recommendations within 60 days, and any other initiatives they've already taken to address some of the issues that staff reports on. We're going to continue to improve the coordination with the electric industry through the sharing of contact information. I believe that's already completed. The next phase of that work will include, actually codifying the coordination that's going to take place during a restoration, and what protocols are necessary to identify the critical infrastructure for priority restorations. And again, the sharing of outage information across industries would provide a mutual benefit, we believe. Staff will also be working with the other New York State agencies and the FCC to improve network resilience and the sharing of outage information. I know Commissioner Sayer mentioned the credentialing issue. That's maybe not an issue for, we're finding within our department, but we certainly, at every opportunity, we try to work with the New York State agencies and the FCC to improve that. So that concludes my report, and I would gladly take any questions.
Thank you, Michael. Let me just ask one question. From looking at these, all the various areas that you've identified where there could be opportunities for improvement, has the staff started to think in terms of priorities? I mean, on the theory that we can't do everything at once well, what would be the ones that you would suggest or think that are priorities to address first? I'm not asking for the answer, but have you started to think in terms of prioritization?
Well, I think we're really encouraged by the participation we got with the coordination with electric. I think that's where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, and if we can get improvements there, I don't know how many times I heard when we asked some of the companies, well, how can you improve your network resiliency? Right. And they said, well, give me a better power grid or give me better power capabilities. So I think that's where we
comes back to the other Michael's fault.
I wouldn't say their fault, but I think the telecom companies do a good job in the things that they can control. Like they can send as many trucks in with fuel so long as there's fuel. It's the things that we would like to see them improve on is not focusing only on their network, but on the bigger network. And I think, with the electric utilities, we're seeing improvement there. So it's encouraging.
Okay. Well, thank you. And first of all, I did want to. It's a very good report. It's comprehensive, and I think you've identified a lot of areas. Clearly, as we move towards more digitalization of the power grid, this interconnection between the communication infrastructure and the electric infrastructure and the need for both to be able to respond well in all situations is going to become even more important. I'm also mindful as we're starting to think about how we support the telecommunications grid with distributed energy. Also plays into what we're trying to do on the electric network. So I think increasing that communication level and making sure we're not siloing or thinking between industries is going to be very important, and thinking about how we use our various programs around energy efficiency and using distributed resources and how they can support effectively both industries. It becomes a great tie-in for what we're looking to do around building resiliency throughout the systems, not just individual systems. So I think these are all good approaches. I would ask that as you're soliciting comments from various parties on how we proceed, I think it is going to be useful to know as we prioritize, where should we be prioritizing from the perspective of solving the biggest amount of problems and then working it down. And perhaps it all can be done at once, but my fear is that we try to take on everything and then things don't happen. So I'd like to get some thoughts on that. With that, let me turn it over to the other commissioners. Commissioner Sayre?
I would agree with Mike that there's a lot of bang for the buck in telecom electric coordination. Mike, you gave a lot of good examples of how, for example, cable TV companies know exactly what neighborhoods their cable boxes are out and could provide that data if there were a way to do it to the electric companies who, without smart meters, don't know with that level of granularity where their power is out. And there are other things as simple as the cable and telecom companies want to know where the power crews are going in the restoration effort so that they can follow behind quickly and restore service as soon as the power's out of the way, as well as keep an eye on the out-of-town crews. I heard a complaint from one cable TV company that they lost more fiber in the course of restoration by out-of-town electric crews who were cutting away the trees and putting up the power lines because the cable TV fiber was kind of wrapped into the tree, but it was working fine until it got cut in the restoration process. And it's good to have the cable people there to watch that going on. But there are significant technical roadblocks to making this work because of the widely divergent outage reporting and repair management systems from utility to utility and from industry to industry. And the balancing act is going to be to expect the utilities to assign their smart operational and IT people to figure out how this information can flow without spending a lot of megabucks on systems changes, but at the same time getting it done. And I very much support the light regulatory touch that staff is now applying to this process, but it should be understood, I think, that the Commission will be ready, willing, and able to exert a regulatory push if things don't move along expeditiously.
Thank you. Did you? Okay. Commissioner Brown?
Just one quick comment. One quick comment related to the scorecard. that's an interesting analysis that cable was cut to restore electricity. And if our scorecard provides an incentive to get the electricity on quicker, and they get more points that way, and if they have to take out 27 cable systems to do so, that's probably not exactly where we want to go.
That's exactly what I was thinking when I was hearing the earlier presentation. But again, I think with better coordination, prior to the storm, that should improve it.
Mr. Berman? I think we're getting worn down. You're lucky being at the end, Mr. Rowley. So this is an informational item at this point. I think, as Commissioner Sayre said, we'll get the report. I think our goal now is to get things started, make certain that we're moving into the right direction, and then we'll take it from there. So thank you very much. I think that's the end then of the regular agenda. And so we're going to be moving into the consent agenda. But before we do so, there are a couple things I wanted to note, because they've been matters on earlier agendas, and I think it's important that we update. One is the 315 area code. We've learned that we had proceedings because we were concerned about the potential for disruption that would be created when a new area code was added. But at this point, what we've heard from the agency that works on these federal agencies is that they're not worried about exhaust at this stage, and so we're going to suspend this proceeding with the understanding that we're going to continue to work to make certain that we're not caught flat-footed. We have an approach if, in fact, that becomes an issue, and that we could restart the proceeding if we have to and do it quickly. I think at the same time, one of the things, there's lessons learned here for us as we work with these agencies is understanding, and I know staff is already working on, is what's the level of our authority, what's the federal authority, how can we better improve this process so it doesn't create this disruption and the concerns that we created. And so even as we're working on this particular issue, there's a broader issue of just understanding how do we deal with these things better, because I think there was a lot of consternation that got created that became unnecessary, but more importantly, a lot of confusion as to who does what and when. So we'll be working on that. The other thing that, any comments on that from any of the other commissioners or staff?
I think that's a very good thing. I'm very glad to hear that we're suspending this in light of the information from the feds and looking at what we can do in the future. So thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And the other thing I wanted to update everyone on is we had a matter before us regarding gas odorization. There's been a settlement, and I think it's important that we identify basically, I think a great outcome. And Peter, would you want to just brief us on that?
Sure. As you may recall, a couple of months ago, we did reach a settlement with Talisman where we were able to get agreement for Talisman to begin to odorize their lines. There were two issues that arose as we were doing that. One was how to apply our regulation, which dealt with which has an exception for gas that's en route to storage. We are thinking that what we will do is examine a rewrite of the rule. So we're in the process of doing that, but we want to see if there are other aspects of the rule that should also be modified at the same time. So that's under works. Another issue that arose was a concern that the pipelines that Talisman was handing their gas off to were not accepting odorized gas, and so our staff was able to work with one of the pipelines, Dominion, and reach a settlement where Dominion is now agreeing. The settlement's not approved yet, but it's got to go to FERC. That Dominion has agreed to accept odorized gas, which I think is a very positive development, and hopefully will begin a trend. So I'm very encouraged that our staff took a very, good, proactive position. Alan Michaels in my unit worked very closely with the gas division and came up with a good move there in an area that we needed. So, good news.
I would echo. It's a great success. More work to get done, but really, really fantastic outcome. Any comments? So let's move to the consent agenda. And I apologize to everyone for the prolonged, but this is a big agenda, and I think we have some items, even on the consent agenda, that I think are noteworthy, and I'd like to just refer to. And what I would do is I have 4 or 5 items. I'll ask the other commissioners to respond, and then if anyone else has comments on other items, please feel free to jump in. But first is we have an item in front of us regarding the Con Ed natural gas conversion. There's the recommendation in this is to amend certain rules that will expedite gas conversion in New York City. This is specific to Con Ed, but we actually have another docket where we're looking at what rules do we need changed for gas conversion. I think of this as a huge win-win. As everyone is aware, that New York City has amended its local laws to ban the use of heavy oil. And and the movement towards natural gas or light oil is certainly hugely valuable from an environmental standpoint in terms of emissions and air quality in the city. But more importantly, is great for economics for consumers. What we were finding, and this is, again, we're always looking at regulation from the standpoint of new circumstances, make you reevaluate even the regulations that made sense at the time. And in this case, it's about who pays for main extensions. And the staff and the parties are recommending certain changes. Other changes that people have recommended we're not going with this time. But I fully expect that in the more generic proceeding, we're going to be taking up what do we need to do to accelerate these expansions and to make certain that our rules are consistent with the policy outcomes we want to achieve. So, and that I think directionally we're absolutely there in this case, and but I also recognize there's more work that's being done, and I applaud that. So, anyone else on that particular item? Okay, the next items that I want to address is concern submetering. I know this was an item that in 2012 the Commission established standards for submetering to make the standards for accuracy and validity of the information consistent with the type of metering we often see with utilities. And the issue here is really getting the industry to where it needs to be so that these meters are available, particularly as we're looking at the use of load response and efficiency and the ability of customers to be able to be effectively proactive prosumers, the ability of them having accurate information so that they can use it and participate in the markets is critical. So it's really important that the sub-meters have that accuracy and validity. At the same time, we want a robust market, and we want multiple competitors. So the challenge we've had is effectively making sure that the market is proceeding and that we have time to that the market has time to respond, but not so prolong it so that we don't get where we want to go. So it is my understanding that what's happening now is that in the recommended order, we were expecting these standards to go in place in January. We're now, staff is recommending a 9-month extension. But at the same time, we will expect I'd like to get a report, and I think the staff is recommending it'll go back to us within 6 months to let us know how things are progressing. Because, developing a market for submetering, and it's like throwing a party and nobody comes. We want to make sure that the industry is there, but at the same time, we want to move it along and have a deadline that people can respond to. So I think it's a good balance, but clearly we want to watch this and make sure that we're moving ahead. Any further comments on that?
I echo your comments on that, and think it's very helpful that we will, and I appreciate the consideration of coming back before the 9 months are up and really looking at it. I think it's very important that we also, as an agency and as the Commission, be very mindful of the fact that we have a significant role in helping to effectively roll this out. And the Commission today is looking at 2 items that it's the first time we'll be approving these new sub-meters, and it's very important that we make sure that we, in a timely fashion, really address future ones that come before us and make sure that we're doing all that we can if there are any blips that are going on there, that we react in a positive way sooner rather than later.
Great. Thank you. The next item, which I'm excited about, is item 372, which is retains to charging for electric vehicles. In his 2013 State of the State report, Governor Cuomo actually relayed the fact is that he was hopeful to see a significant increase on the amount of electric vehicles in the state from today. And right now we're looking about from maybe 3,000 to 4,000 to maybe in 2018 a goal of 30 to 40,000 and maybe 1 million in 2025. Clearly for us who are interested in energy efficiency and carbon reduction, we all recognize that there's a lot we can do in the industries we regulate, but the transportation industry also needs to be modified, and electric vehicles are the best way to get there, but we need to make it effective. Well, we can't have electric vehicles without charging stations, and so we needed to at the same time create this infrastructure for charging stations. Our charge on this is to determine whether or not these are regulated by us, and I think in this order, the staff is proposing that we declare that there is no jurisdiction under public service law, that these are not plant from the traditional definition, and really at this point is not really a sale. Instead, what's happening is that we have the charging stations are providing a product. The product they're charging is a service related to the charging of vehicles. It's just like a laundromat who provides drying services. They use electricity to help you dry your clothes, but they're not selling you electricity. They're selling you a service, dryers. And so I think this is clearly appropriate. At the same time, this is a nascent industry. We understand, as those of us who've gone through competitive markets in the future, the business models that exist today could change. Different things may be modified, and so in the future, if in fact it appears that this falls within our jurisdiction and it's necessary for us to exercise it, we'll be prepared to do so. And lastly, saying that we don't have regulatory authority over charging station does not diminish the authority we have over electric utilities, and to make sure that the practices there are appropriate towards making certain that this new industry can flourish. So in our little bit of making this industry work, is we're saying that the best thing we can do at this time is stand down and allow the industry to prosper. But I'm excited about this opportunity and look forward to seeing this particular aspect of electricity grow. So any comments on that?
I love this item. I love your comments, and I think this is great. We have taken a step in not stepping in and having regulatory burdens just for the sake of having them, and I applaud where we are on this. So thank you very much, Chair.
It's exciting times.
Chair, could I just make
Sure.
one quick comment on this? You used the laundromat example, which I think is an excellent example. But we expect at the laundromat that the connections of the washers and the dryers and all this stuff is going to be done to local code. And, I'm very hopeful that charging stations also are required to meet local code in terms of safety for people that are plugging them in. We don't need to exert jurisdiction for that to happen. That should happen through local codes. I know New York City already has one. I see in the footnote that there's a lot of work being done in that example. But it's a place I think we want to keep our eyes out open. The last thing we need is have an accident related to a charging station, because people will look at us and say, "Where were you?"
Commissioner Brown, that's a good point, and I don't want to diminish the fact that there are other regulations in place And the fact that we're not regulating on price doesn't mean that we want the industry to be unregulated. There are also consumer practices, weights and measures, all sorts of things that I believe would cover this under just basic law and good administration of business in the state. But thank you. Commissioner Akinpur, anything on this item?
Amen.
Okay. The other item I do want to note is that we have item 376, which relates to Liberty Power. Liberty Power is an energy services company in the state. Last spring, the Commission revoked their ability to conduct business in the state because of concerns relative to their marketing practices and violation of the Uniform Business Practices Act. I recognize that the staff has been working very closely with Liberty, and Liberty has come up with a program to modify its marketing practices to address the concerns that have been raised. And so the recommendation is that we reinstate Liberty as an energy services company in the state, with the proviso that we continue to have concerns, and we will monitor that. And if in fact Liberty is not conforming, we will step in and be able to revoke their ability to practice or to function the state again. This is obviously a difficult issue. We all want retail markets to work, but it's really important, and electricity is a particularly difficult issue because it's a commodity everybody needs. And unlike other commodities, the difficulty is around getting transparent information. So one of the things that I know staff is working on is how do we improve this market? How do we make certain that in providing a retail competition, it's competition that really drives value and innovation, and like all markets, is transparent. And so the consumers are making choices, they're making informed choices, and have the full wealth of capabilities to really affect what they're buying, how much they're buying, etc. I think that this is really flows into what a lot of folks are looking at, and certainly what we're looking at is how do we improve these industries? How do we make customer choice real choice? And with that, I would note that in addition to the fact that we are going to continue to work with Liberty and observe and making sure they conform, we have this docket that we're looking at retail services, and that the changes that we will be looking at in that docket I would expect to apply to Liberty as well as anyone else. And Doug, I think you're in charge of that, and I assume that that's the way you're seeing it as well?
You said it perfectly.
Okay, so I applaud the efforts. I know this was hard. I know that Liberty just really wants to get back into the state, and we'd like them to be a valuable part of our competitive market. So we'll go forward from there. I would propose we go forward from there. Any other comments on this, Commissioner Akinpur?
Well, I'd just like to say I really commend the chair for taking this head on. It's a situation that was unpleasant. We don't want to send anyone out of business from New York, but we do have rules and we have consumer protections, and we want to make sure that the public at large is being protected and has the proper knowledge when making a decision. So I know that this is going to go to another level, not this particular company, but all ESCOs, to make sure that we want their products. We want the public to know about their products, but they have to do it in a proper way. So I think this kind of opened the door as to where we're going to be going, and it really was an important matter. And again, I thank the chair for her leadership in this matter. So good job.
Thank you. Any other comments on this matter? The last items I want to just refer to are on items 563 and 564. They concern Verizon. 563 is with respect to Verizon's request to sell a portion of its office building at 140 West Street in New York. And 564 is Verizon's third quarter 2013 service quality report, which we will be releasing, that Mr. Hume and his staff prepared. Basically, the issue here is, as I see it, is the staff has been working with Verizon on service quality issues since 2010. We understand that telecommunications is a heavily competitive market, but there are areas of this market that remain non-competitive and where people don't have a real alternative. And it's so critical as we become increasingly communications dependent in our society, to make sure that service quality remains high, even particularly in the non-competitive regions. The staff report is recommending that they will continue to work with the utility, with Verizon, but we are seeing service deterioration, and we're not seeing improvement. What I'd like to see out of this is that, in addition for the staff to work with them, I'd like to have a real plan. I'd really like to understand what are the particular issues, how they're going to be addressed, what are the root causes, and the timing to get these things addressed. I think we're beyond just getting reports. We really need to start looking at solutions. So I'd like the report to plan to come up with in December, and I believe Verizon has offered that, is that we will start seeing a real plan with real desired outcomes, and that we can see execution around. So I'd like to get that in December. I also want to note in its petition to sell its office building, Verizon itself identifies that one of the uses that it intends to make of the proceeds is around improving service quality. And I applaud them for that. I think it's great, because that's exactly what we would like to see. Selling off an asset, funds are available, and let's plow it back into the business where it needs to be plowed into. So I applaud the company for volunteering that, and we fully expect that that's the type of activity that we're going to get around improving service quality. So with that, I look forward to the December report. I'd like a tangible plan. And I'd like us to see that in the next quarterly reports, rather than deterioration, we see continued improvement. So thank you. That's all I have on the consent agenda. If there are any more comments on those matters.
On the last item on Verizon's plan, I would just like to make a request for staff to take a particular look at small business customers in connection with the plan that's filed and the steps that are being taken.
Any further comments on that?
Yes, not on that, but on other items.
Go ahead, please.
I have on item 265 and 366, both are interrelated to Fortis and Central Hudson. And I just really wanted to state that prior to my arrival at the PSC, the Commission, after a lengthy and thorough examination and regulatory review, determined that the joint proposal for the acquisition between Fortis and Central Hudson was appropriate. However, this acquisition went through further critical review with the commencement of this petition. And I appreciate the hard work of all who not only took the time to comment, whether in support or opposition, but also for the hard work of the Commission staff who reviewed all the comments and analyzed the specifics of this petition. And I am very pleased to see that the item before us in 265, which continues the authorizing the acquisition, I believe this will continue to ensure safe, secure, and reliable access to utility service for residential and business customers. I also like that at the same time, we have item 366, which is talking about the economic development programs. As staff knows, I'm very interested in the utilities and their economic development programs, and really what is being done on these programs, and what is being worked with the utilities to make sure that the dollars for these economic development programs really go out the door and really have some success stories. And I'm really glad to see that now with the acquisition in item 265, we have the 366 item, which allows us to now move forward on that. Since becoming a commissioner, I've had the pleasure of visiting Central Hudson's Poughkeepsie facility and, in fact, taking a tour of the customer call center. And it was very clear to me that the employees, especially the call center employees, are just like the ones here, are committed to serving their customers and their communities, and I'm in full support of both of these items. So thank you. The other item that I wanted to speak on is item 375, the Rochester Area Reliability Project. I know that there's been a lot of interest in this. We've had a lot of comments from not only from the Farm Bureau, but from various state representatives and local representatives, including Senator Ranzenhofer, who has a representative here with us today. I am really, really happy that this item is now focused on opening up the record to re-examine alternatives, and really we are really directing the utility to report weekly to staff on its efforts. I am hopeful that all the parties working together can hopefully come up with some success for that both wins on both sides, and maybe there's something that can be done. I know that the ALJ that was at the session where we had last looked at this had worked with the parties and really spent a considerable amount of time. It was, I think, one of his first roles in his new hat as an ALJ, and I really was able to get a flavor for just how hard the ALJs work, and I am confident that this helps us get a lot further by reopening the record, and I appreciate that, and I know that this is something that we'll all be following closely, and it's very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments on any aspect of the consent agenda?
Only that I'd like to recuse myself from item 375.
Okay, thank you. I was going to ask. Well, then, with that, then, all those in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Hearing no opposition, and there being no opposition, the recommendations are adopted. So thank you all very much. Thank you for your patience. And there's hearing lots of grumbling of stomachs. We'll be adjourned. I know.